We'll now hear from Chris Airola. And Chris and I have known each other for quite a while. I don't even remember how long, 15 or 20 years. It's been a while. And I have huge amount of respect for Chris. He's a property manager. He's also been in and around the capital and trying to maintain an understanding of what manner of craziness is going on with the laws and gets firsthand doses of the results of the laws as a property manager. So I'll now turn it over to Chris Airola.
Okay, thank you, Joel. The stuff you just heard from Dean and Ryan, I think is extremely important to have as a foundation as a real estate investor. And that's how I want to talk to you today. Is I want to talk to you from the point of view that you either are a real estate investor or you want to be a real estate investor or you have investments now and you want to expand that. So as you know, I own a property management company. We have about 1,100 properties under management. That translates to about 860 investors in our portfolio. Some of these investors are kind of sophisticated. Most of them are not. I consider them to be mom and pop investors. And really that's who's out there owning a lot of our investment stock or investment homes. A lot of the landlords are just mom and pops. You go to these big landlord conventions, and most of these people have between 1 and 20 properties. And even at 20 properties, you can still be considered a mom and pop for sure. And so the other thing I want to talk about is well, how to be a good landlord, how to be a successful investor through being a good landlord and knowing how to invest, where to invest. But again, what you just heard from Ryan and Dean is really the foundation that you need to understand. But I'll temper that by saying when I write an offer to purchase a property or I'm getting ready to write my check, these are not the main considerations on my mind. I have all that in my background, but let's talk about what I'm really looking at. So for this discussion, we're going to talk about single family homes, duplexes, and condominiums. We're not going to be talking about commercial properties or large scale apartment buildings. I doubt that first time investors or people owning 3 or 4 properties are really going to be jumping in and owning large commercial properties or apartments right off the bat. We're looking at people who are generally long-term investors. In fact, I started my company 35 years ago, and some of those investors and their properties are the same as the day I signed them up. So people who invest for 10, 20, 30 years, this is what this is how I cut my teeth, if you will, in the business. I got my license in 1983. There was no such thing as a flipper back then. There was certainly no such thing as a wholesaler. Everybody that got into real estate did it for the long haul. They were all in it for the long game. And so that's how I was kind of raised, if you will, in the business. And that's how I still think. And it's how I still think is the best way to generate long-term wealth in the real estate investment business. So let's talk about what's important. What am I thinking about when I go to write an offer on a property? Well, I'm thinking of a couple of things. In fact, if somebody calls me and says, hey, I have an investment I think you should look at, or I'm looking at a property to invest in, there's really 2 things I care about. First and foremost, again, aware of everything that Ryan and Dean are talking about, but what do I really want to know? I want to know what kind of area is this? And I want to know what is the fair market rent for today? What is today's fair market rent? So when we talk about area, we talk about area classes. We talk about class A, B, C. This is common in commercial and large residential terminology, but we use it also for single family homes. So an A area, just to describe, is an area where, newer homes, higher rent, less crime, et cetera, less risk. Okay, and that's really what this is all about. Whereas if I'm going to invest in a property and they tell me or I determine this is a C class area, older home, lower rents, more evictions, higher costs when tenants move out, more rehab when tenants leave, that's a C class area, and of course you have A, B, C, and I guess D. Um, and so if I invest in an C class area, I know that's more risk. So what do I want? I want a higher return on my investment. So again, I'm thinking in terms of long-term investment here. And oh, by the way, F class, that's fool's gold. That's if you're familiar with Sacramento, that is, I'll name some streets, Sayonara in out in Citrus Heights. You know, I've been around that property for basically 40 years. There's a whole bunch of fourplexes there. I've never seen anyone invest and do anything but lose money, get frustrated. But it looks great on paper. That's the problem. These properties can look great on paper. So you got to be able to recognize that. The other question I have after I determine what area it is and what kind of return I'm going to want, I'm going to say, well, okay, what's the rent? What's the fair market rent? Not yesterday, not 3 years from now, not 4 years ago. I want to know, what is the rent right now? Because that is going to in turn tell me how much I want to pay for this property, regardless of what price they're asking. So again, this goes back to well, let's talk about that for a minute. Area. I might want a C class area. I might want at least if I can earn 4% in my high yield savings account, and I'm going to pull that out for a C class property, I really want double my return. So I want an 8% return. Um, and if I am going to an A area, say that home is in Rockland or Roseville, a nicer home, then I might settle for a 5 or a 6% return. And then I can determine how much I want to offer for that property. Um, so kind of redundant here, but what is not important is 3 years ago or 3 years from now. Let's talk about why. So, as a long-term investor, somebody who's going to buy the property and hold it for 10, 20 years, maybe I'll exchange it. But again, that's like holding it because it's the same money, went from one property to another. I might look at a fair market value and say, well, rent value, and say, well, I can get $2,500 a month for that property. And I'm going to do my numbers, my calculation. I'm going to pencil it out, as we say, based on that $2,500. Now, this is kind of important. Do I worry about what if there's a 10% reduction in the rent next year or 2 years from now? Or maybe a 20% reduction. Do I worry about that? Well, not so much. Not as much as you would if you were going to buy the home and try to flip it, or even buy the home and try to live there and sell it, a couple of years because move on to a bigger, better home. If you look at, say, $2,500 and you see that that's a $250 rent reduction, a 10% reduction translate, that's about $3,000 a year. Okay, it's not going to make a landlord happy. It's not going to make me happy, but I understand it's a cycle. It should be no big deal. After all, if I'm going to replace a heat and an air conditioning unit, that might run me $9,000 or $10,000. A tenant might move out and tear the place up and cost me $3,000 or $4,000. So I'm not really going to make a decision based on, oh, I hope the rents go up 10%, or they need to go up 10%, or what if they go down 250? That's really not part of my napkin test, if you will. It's not part of my calculations that I'm going to look at and worry about so much as would somebody who's looking at buying the property to buy or sell. Because let's look at this. Somebody wants to flip a property, or maybe it's a starter home. And you say, I want to, you're a younger couple, you want to buy this smaller 1,200 square foot home, live there for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and then sell it. Well, in that case, a 10% reduction in price can become very significant, can it? In other words, you can get trapped in that property and stay there for a long time, which is kind of what's happened uh, in some cases to many people out there. 20% reduction can be disastrous. And we have seen this twice in our history of managing property. And people, what happens in a 20% reduction? Well, often they'll walk away from their home, and those life changes happen that Ryan and Dean talked about, and they need to move out. They are more likely maybe to just walk away if the prices are 20% down and they don't or can't afford to be a landlord, an investor. So you go back to this slide. Okay, 10%, it's kind of a no big deal. It's just part of owning property. If you're in it to buy the property, live there, flip it, or sell it soon, it becomes a huge deal, doesn't it? And we talk about the fact that younger people, I think somewhere, and I think it's in one of my next slides, the average age of a home buyer, first-time home buyer, is something like 40 years old now, 40 years old. And a lot of these young people, think about it. The big crash was almost 20 years ago. These people might have been 14 or 15 years old, and they saw their parents have to walk out of their home, lose their home, go back to renting. And so a great deal of fear has become associated with home ownership. So as I talk to tenants, because we have a lot of tenants who could buy a home, they have 800 credit scores, they're making 350 a year, 350,000 combined income or more, and they rent. And when you talk to them, they say, well, I don't want to worry about toilets and this kind of thing. But when you really talk to them, you find out that, well, they had that experience of their parents getting trapped. That was pretty traumatic. They were young, highly emotional time. And so there's a great deal of fear associated with 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 buying a home. So they keep renting. Um, One more thing I would say about this, when you talk about flippers and wholesalers, and they say, well, I'm a real estate investor. I want to reiterate, I don't really consider that real estate investing any more than when I was in college and I would buy a motorcycle and fix it up and sell it and make a few dollars. I wasn't a motorcycle investor. I bought and sold many cars that I would buy, fix up and sell. I wasn't a car investor. If I bought that car, put it in my garage, and took care of it and then sold it later, I'm an investor. But what I'm talking about here are long-term property owners, people who are considering at least a 10-year ownership, and really to develop long-term wealth in this business, you really need, I think, to be thinking at least in terms of a 10-year experience. Okay, so that's my philosophy on investing. We need to look at area. We need to look at current market, and we need to know the parameters that help us then make our decision in terms of sales price. So let's talk about landlording in 2025, 26, and beyond. The things that I've seen change tremendously in the last 30 years, and most specifically in the last 6 years since 2000, the advent of Assembly Bill 1482, which is known as the Rent Control Bill, we've seen a great increase in tenant expectations, an increase of landlord responsibilities, and an increase in government regulation. So let's kind of talk about these a little bit here. There's that demographic, 40 years and older. 40 years is the average age of a first-time buyer is 40 years. So what does this mean? It means that 20 years ago, I was definitely renting to a lot of 20-somethings. Currently, I rent to a lot of 30-somethings and even 40-somethings. So are these demographics different? Yes, they're very different. They're quite different, in fact. They want more amenities. They want those amenities to function, to work. If there's a hot tub, they want it to work. If there's a garbage disposal, they want that to work. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. They want better customer service. When something needs to be done, when they have a question, when they have a problem, they don't view this as, well, it's just a rental. I'll call about that broken whatever in a week from now. They'll call right now. They'll call at 2 o'clock in the morning and leave a message and wonder why no one got back to them by 9:30 the next day. And they're just in general more sophisticated. They have more life experience. The difference between a 25-year-old and a 35-year-old is life experience, really. And so it's a different experience for us as a property management company. So the individual landlords that I manage for, or individual landlords who are DIY, do-it-yourself landlords, they need to step up and understand this, or they're just not going to be successful as they might have been 20 years ago with a very different attitude. You know, it's just a rental. They can wait till tomorrow. Those days are gone. That's not the way it is anymore. Here's some examples. Here's a couple of examples that I see. Um, you know, in many of our homes, most of our homes will have a microwave that's mounted in the cabinet and it's over the top of the stove. And the microwave goes out, you know, as they do. Well, a microwave such as this might cost anywhere from $700 to $1,000 to replace it. By the time you send someone over, troubleshoot it, they go out and have to measure it. They go out and get a new microwave. Maybe they have some adjustments, get the fan hooked up. There's some labor involved and such. And so sometimes, you know, my old school clients will say, ah, yeah, I'm just going to go to Walmart and pick up a counter microwave and I'll set it on the counter and they can use that. And you know what? 25 years ago, that was probably very acceptable. Well, it was acceptable to in most cases. If you do that today, forget it. It's not going to work. That tenant is going to be very upset, first of all, have a whole different attitude about the property and how well they want to take care of it. And they might even be asking for a reduction in rent. So it goes back to philosophy now. You got to keep up with the times. We don't do that. If you own a property and it's got an amenity like a nice microwave over the stove, and that microwave goes out, you got to replace it with a like kind unit that functions the same, or you are devaluing your property, your relationship with the tenant, your ability to keep that tenant, and your ability to maintain your return on that property. So these are some of the things that have changed. We just had a new law passed here, and it took effect January 1st, and that is the refrigerator rule. And there's a lot of confusion around the new refrigerator law because the law says it's very vague. Let's put it that way. I'm not going to go into the specifics, but it's very vague. It doesn't tell you how big the fridge has to be. It doesn't tell you whether the fridge needs to have a freezer built into it. It doesn't say much other than you must provide a refrigerator. So we've had some talk where landlords get all grumpy and they say, I don't want to do that. You know, I've never had a fridge. If the fridge breaks down, I got to take care of it. And all that's true. But sorry, Charlie, that's the law now. So you have to at least offer to provide a refrigerator. And when a landlord starts doing something like this, let's go get a dormitory type refrigerator. I say, no, 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 no. We're not doing that. We're going to put a regular fridge in there with a freezer, by the way. We're not going to get that 14-inch, you know, cubic inch thing. We're going to get a medium grade refrigerator and put it in. This keeps the value of your property where it needs to be. This keeps the relationship with the tenant where it needs to be. And yes, the tenant's responsible for if they destroy that or harm it or damage that refrigerator, which can lead to other issues when tenant move out. But the fact is, let's make sure that we're not operating in the 2026 rental market with a 2000 or 1999 mental mindset. That will not work. It will not work anymore. And by the way, there's too many government regulations that are going to follow up on you and catch you if you start playing that game too much. Well, some of the legal requirements, the legal responsibilities, as I mentioned, have increased profoundly since 2020. And so we have, you know, government requirements, refrigerator law we just talked about, rent control rules are still amending rent control rules. How to screen tenants has become very regulated now. When you get a tenant application, you know, I mean, I've heard people say everything from I go with my gut, you know, or I want to look at their car and see what condition it's in, or you know, I want to meet them. No, no, no. There's basically three things you can look at when you're tenant screening. That's income, credit, and rental history. That's it. Are we allowed to discriminate against Section 8 anymore? No. Does that mean we always have to rent a Section 8? No. So if you're going to be tenant screening, you need to document these kind of things very well. You need to understand the rules, understand the laws, and you need to comply with them because let me tell you, I've been in front of the Fair Housing Board more times than I care to count because oftentimes when we turn somebody down, they will complain, they turned me down because of this, that, and the other thing. When reality is we turned them down because they had a 399 credit score. You better have your ducks in a row. You better have all your documentation because that's 2026. That's really 2020 and beyond. You really need to have that documentation, or fair housing may rule against you, and that can be brutal. Those penalties and stuff can get into the many thousands of dollars and so on. Um, you also have court decisions that are separate from government decisions, government requirements, government rules. Not all rules are laws. Not all of the responsibilities that a landlord has are written in the civil code. For example, let's take oleanders, for example. I would never rent a property to a tenant wherein the property had oleanders. There's a couple of exceptions with country properties. You can't go take all the oleanders out of a 10-acre property, but you do have to then give some disclosures to the tenants. There's no law that says do that. There's no civil code that says do that, but it's something called best practices, and your feet will be held to the fire if you don't understand best practices when you're a landlord. Speaking of oleanders, I read that 6 to 8 children a year die of oleander poisoning, oleander tea. The little girls go out there and the beautiful oleanders, beautiful flowers. So they pick the leaves, they make some tea, and there's disastrous consequences. You don't want to be on the other end of that as a landlord. If you have a city property or a standard property and you've got some oleanders, you need to know to get rid of those, right? That's just part of knowing the business, knowing your profession. And late fees, there's rules on about how much you can charge for a late fee. You used to charge 10%, and if it's late you charge a little more, and every day you get charged. None of that stuff anymore. It's all very regulated. And a lot of these regulations, I'm not complaining. I think many of them are very good, actually. And many of them are in place because we had bad actors as landlords. We had people taking advantage of unknowing tenants who didn't know the rules. And so the courts and our legislators has had to come in and take control. But in my view, a good thing often starts out as not a good thing because it just goes from something good to something far too extreme, and that's a topic for another day. But and finally, you need to know that these rules that we have on how to do things, how not to do things when it comes to working with tenants, they vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. For example, if you have a property in Sacramento County, let's say it's over there on Marconi, and it's on the Sacramento City side of the street, and then you own a property on the Sacramento County side of the street, which is just the other side of Marconi. That's the line. Um, and you want to deliver a notice to vacate. These are different processes, different procedures. They're not the same. The rules are different. One, the city has, of course, the statewide 1482, but they also have the Sacramento City Tenant Protection Act that you have to follow, which you don't have to follow on the other side of the street. So you need to know what it is that you're getting into. You need to understand the rules, the risk, and that's why you really need to hire a property management company with some experience, who knows what they're doing, and is very aware of all of these kind of rules, because that's going to dictate your overall success. You can be very successful, make a bunch of money every month, and along comes $100,000 lawsuit that you lose. There goes your profit for the next 20 years or 10 years or past 5 years, whatever. And all of a sudden, you probably should have left your money in your high yield savings account. So this is what you're getting into. I still think real estate is the greatest investment on the planet. And I invest in real estate, and I will. And I'll continue that, even in California. Yes, even in California. So what does a landlord do? How do they stay up on all this? Well, education. You need an education source, whether that be a friendly attorney, whether it be your property management company, whether you join the California Apartment Association or many of these other associations around. Um, and they're going to give you lots of seminars and lots of legal seminars and lots of uh, legislative updates. And you need to really stay up on that, or you should have a management company. Whether you're a management company or an individual owner, you're going to need better management systems. Most DIY landlords I know now, they're using some kind of software to track everything, the maintenance, what happened. The tenant called and said this, so I told him that, and I did this, and it's all documented. So if something goes wrong, then you have something to fall back on. You have something to look at and say, well, here's my record. It's not, you look in the air and I think I called him on this day. No, you need to have good management systems in place. And those management systems have to be able to document your processes. The tenant gave their notice on this day. The tenant reported mold on this day. I did this on this day. The repairman showed up on this day. The tenant wouldn't let him in on this day, blah, blah, blah. You have to have all of this stuff documented because the consequences can be devastating. But the way to really make money in this business is to stay up on this stuff. So when these issues come along, the plaintiff attorney basically folds their little notebook and walks out. A little slide, I've been sued for at one point many millions of dollars in a case. And when the attorneys got to the table and they looked everything over, that multi-million-dollar lawsuit went away, just like that. And it virtually went away. And that's because our documentation was extremely good. Our processes were very regimented and so on. So there's my lecture on a little bit on real estate investing. Now, the new thing, right? You've heard of AI, artificial intelligence. And when I tell people I'm using artificial intelligence in my business, they say, oh, they answer the phone. Well, that would be a pretty small use of AI. But really what we're moving to and what I think you're going to see in this industry and probably every other industry on the planet is a move to what's called artificial general intelligence, AGI, where not only does it's not, well, the example I heard was this. If you used AI and said, how do I start a business? I don't know, a bakery. It would say, well, get a shop, go buy an oven, get a donut fryer and do this and do that and do that. Whereas if you use AGI, you can say, start a bakery business for you. And you give them your Amazon accounts, your credit cards, and they'll go out and lease it. AGI will go out and lease the building, buy the equipment, have it delivered, arrange for the hire a baker, and so on. So these kind of things, this concept is what we and many other management companies are now introducing into their management system. Why? Because we're lazy? No. Why? Because we want to lay off employees? No. But because it actually improves our documenting, our management systems and our documentation of those management systems. Handling maintenance requests that come in at 2 in the morning, we have a really good record of not just, hey, they called in, but a good record of the conversation that was had between our AI person, if you call it that. Our little AI is named Mason. And we hired a company to develop an AI for us and specifically for our industry. And it will have a conversation and document what's going on so that later the story can't change. And later we don't hear, well, I said this and I said that. No, you didn't. Yes, you did. So on. So that's what I see in terms of the real estate, being a real estate investor. I think it's, like I said, extremely important to understand and hear what Dean and Ryan are saying. And the more times you hear it, the better, because that's the foundation that we build everything upon. Now, I just had to throw this in here because it kind of impressed me. The time it took to gain 1 million users in 1999, Netflix appeared, and it took 2.5 years for Netflix to get to 1 million users. Facebook, 2004, it took 10 months. Instagram, 2010, it took just 2.5 months to hit 1 million users. And in 2022, ChatGPT only took 5 days to get to 1 million users. It's it's there. I put that up because it's just reflective of how quickly I see things changing. And I'm 68 years old and was talking about retiring, but I find myself leaning into this now, leaning into this industry to make sure that we keep up, to help make sure we keep up. I have good people on the ground that know how to use this stuff, but I lean in and I want to make sure we are at the forefront and we stay ahead of this because it's moving fast. So with that, I wrap it up, Joel. Thank you very much. I don't know how much of that you saw, but uh,
Yeah, we
I,
saw it. It was great.
I hope you heard it if you couldn't see it.
Chris, thank you so much.